History often remembers the grand battles, those epic clashes where armies met head-on, deciding the fates of nations. But today, we're stepping back to a lesser-known moment, a hidden gem in the annals of the American Revolutionary War. Imagine for a moment, a quiet, unassuming field in rural New York, a place few had heard of, became the setting for a dramatic turning point in the fight for independence. It was August 16, 1777, a day that would change the course of history forever. This is the story of the Battle of Bennington, an event that could have easily been forgotten, but instead became a spark that ignited the flames of hope for a fledgling nation. In this video, we'll uncover the gripping details of the Battle of Bennington, a battle that shattered British confidence, disrupted their plans, and boosted the morale of the Patriot cause. Stick around as we peel back the layers of one of the American Revolution's most underrated battles. You won't want to miss this. Chapter 1. Setting the stage. The year was 1777, and the American colonies had been at war with Britain for 2 long years. The conflict that started in 1775 was proving to be a protracted, bloody struggle, far from the swift victory the British had anticipated. After 2 years of conflict, the British Empire began to change its approach. The once believed unbreakable chain between New England and the rest of the colonies seemed like a possible weak point to target. The new strategy? Divide and conquer. The British formulated a daring plan to isolate the New England colonies, which they viewed as the heart of the rebellion. The idea was to create a divide between New England and the more loyal southern colonies, splitting the rebellious territories. The strategy relied on a 3-pronged assault, each led by different British commanders. General John Burgoyne was tasked with leading the northern force, marching south from Canada towards Albany, New York. His goal was to link up with other British forces advancing from the south and the west, thereby cutting off New England. This grand pincer movement would, in theory, bring the Patriot resistance to its knees. Chapter 2. British forces falter. At first, Burgoyne's plan seemed to be working. His army captured key forts like Fort Ticonderoga, and his troops advanced steadily. But as summer wore on, things started to go wrong. His supply lines were stretched thin, and his progress was painfully slow, due in part to the Americans' guerrilla tactics of harassing the British and destroying key roads and bridges. By late July, Burgoyne was running out of time, men, and perhaps most importantly, supplies. His army was starving, and they desperately needed food, horses, and other provisions to keep moving. This is where the story of Bennington begins. Chapter 3. Baum's mission. Burgoyne sent Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum on a crucial mission. Baum, a seasoned officer from the Hessian forces, mercenaries hired by the British, was ordered to lead a detachment of around 700 men to raid the town of Bennington. Their goal? To secure much-needed supplies, horses, draft animals, and provisions, believed to be stored there by the American militia. Baum's detachment was a diverse force: Hessians, British soldiers, local loyalists, and Iroquois warriors, all marching together. But they marched under a dangerous assumption that Bennington was lightly defended. In reality, the Americans were ready, and they weren't about to give up their town without a fight. Chapter 4. The American response. The citizens of the surrounding territories had heard of the British advance and knew they needed to act fast. General John Stark, a former officer in the Continental Army, was given command of the militia to defend Bennington. Stark was no ordinary general. He was known for his independence and fierce loyalty to his men. When New Hampshire called on its citizens to defend the town, they answered in droves. By the time Baum's detachment was within striking distance of Bennington, Stark had gathered nearly 2,000 militiamen from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont. Among them were Seth Warner and his famed Green Mountain Boys, a group of tough frontiersmen who had already proven themselves in earlier battles. Stark was a strategist at heart. Knowing the British were coming, he moved his troops out of Bennington and positioned them strategically along the routes that Baum's forces would have to take. He wasn't about to let the British march into Bennington without facing a fight. Chapter 5. The Rain and the Standoff. And then the weather stepped in. For a day and a half, the rain came down in sheets, halting any chance of battle. Baum's forces, camped out on a hill near Bennington, built makeshift fortifications and waited for reinforcements from Burgoyne. Meanwhile, Stark used the rain delay to his advantage, sending out skirmishers to probe the British lines, even taking down 30 of Baum's Iroquois warriors during the standoff. As both sides waited for the weather to clear, Baum sent word to Burgoyne, requesting reinforcements. Unbeknownst to Baum, however, the Americans had also called for reinforcements. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. Chapter 6. The battle begins. Finally, on the afternoon of August 16th, the weather broke. The rain stopped, and the sun emerged from behind the clouds. Stark, seizing the moment, ordered his men to prepare for an all-out assault. Rallying his troops, Stark famously declared, "There are your enemies, the Redcoats and the Tories. They are ours, or this night Molly Stark sleeps a widow." Stark's plan was bold. His militia, mostly farmers and local townsmen, were not professional soldiers, but they were determined. Stark ordered his men to spread out and surround Baum's position. Using the thick woods for cover, the Americans moved into position, ready to strike. The Americans employed a clever trick. The Hessians had been told that any soldiers wearing white paper in their hats were loyalists. Stark's men picked up on this and donned bits of white paper in their own hats, allowing them to get dangerously close to the British lines before opening fire. Chapter 7. The battle intensifies. When the battle finally erupted, it was like nothing Stark's men had ever seen. The sound of musket fire echoed across the field like thunder, and the fighting was fierce. Baum's Hessian troops, though well-trained, found themselves completely surrounded. Baum himself led a desperate cavalry charge to break free from the American encirclement, but the charge failed miserably. Baum was mortally wounded, and his remaining men were forced to surrender. By late afternoon, the Americans had secured a decisive victory. They captured hundreds of Hessian soldiers, along with much-needed supplies. But as Stark's men were busy rounding up prisoners, another threat loomed on the horizon. Chapter 8. Breymann's reinforcements arrive. Just when the Americans thought the battle was over, British reinforcements arrived. Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich von Breymann and his 550 men marched onto the battlefield, hoping to rescue Baum's forces. Stark's exhausted militia, caught off guard, began to retreat in the face of the fresh British troops. But then, just in the nick of time, reinforcements for the Americans arrived. Seth Warner and his Green Mountain Boys, along with fresh militia from Vermont, charged into the fray. With their help, Stark's men regrouped and launched a counterattack. The fighting was brutal and continued until darkness fell. In the end, the Americans forced Breymann's troops to retreat, leaving behind their artillery and suffering heavy casualties. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. The Battle of Bennington was a decisive victory for the Americans. Out of Baum's original force of 700 men, only about 150 escaped. The rest were either killed or captured. On the American side, losses were relatively light, around 30 dead and 40 wounded. But the true impact of the battle went far beyond the immediate casualties. The defeat at Bennington was a major setback for Burgoyne's campaign. He had lost nearly 1,000 men, half of them regular troops, and was now critically short on supplies. Worse yet, the loss of Native American support left him vulnerable to American guerrilla tactics in the weeks that followed. This defeat set the stage for Burgoyne's eventual surrender at Saratoga, a turning point in the Revolutionary War. The victory at Bennington wasn't just a military success. It was a morale boost for the entire Patriot cause. It showed that even a small force of determined militia could stand up to the might of the British Empire. Today, the Battle of Bennington is celebrated in Vermont every August, a reminder of the courage and determination that helped secure American independence. If you found this story of the Battle of Bennington fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth stories from history. Let us know in the comments below which battles or events you'd like us to cover next. And as always, thanks for watching.